Hola, David. Hola, mi Sally. No me escucha. Hola, hola.
Buenos días, Carmen. ¿Me escucha? Hola, hola, Carmen.
Hola, hola.
Ah, ok. Solamente quería confirmar que estuviese bien el audio.
Sí, sí.
Este mismo link este es el que se va a utilizar para la primera sesión, ¿verdad? De Jaime.
Hola, mi Sally o David, alguien me ayuda. Auxilio. Ay, no, nadie me contesta.
Consulta, entonces, es la misma sesión para la primera.
Morning, all.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Miss Ali.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's so great to have you here this morning. We'll be starting in a few minutes. We're having some tech issues here, but don't worry, we'll just be starting in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you so much for being part of this English Forum for English Teachers. All righty, everyone. We're so ready to get started with this English Forum. So good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual forum for English teachers, Bringing Language to Life, hosted by Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán. Thank you all for joining us today from near and far. We're truly excited to have such a dedicated and diverse group of educators gathered together to exchange ideas, experiences, and insights that are shaping the future of English language teaching. This forum brings together a wonderful lineup of specialists, teachers, researchers, and practitioners who will be sharing valuable insights into the evolving world of English language teaching. From innovative practices to research on language acquisition, there's truly today something for everybody. So whether you're here to get ideas for research, gain new strategies for your classroom, or simply be inspired by colleagues, we hope this space becomes a rich and engaging platform for collaboration. Before we begin our sessions, we're honored to have a few words of welcome from the leadership of our institution. In this morning, en esta mañana nos acompaña el profesor Bartolomé Chinchilla, who is the Vice Rector of Wellness and Student Life Office at UPNFM. Profesor Bartolomé, un gusto tenerlo con nosotros en esta mañana.
Muchas gracias.
Comparte con nosotros unas palabras también de bienvenida y de inauguración de este evento.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Estimadas autoridades universitarias, distinguidos conferencistas, estimados colegas, docentes, participantes nacionales e internacionales, invitados especiales, apreciado equipo organizador. Reciban un saludo respetuoso y fraterno a nombre de la doctora Lexi Concepción Medina Mejía, rectora de la Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, quien me ha encomendado el alto honor de brindarles estas palabras de bienvenida al inicio del Foro Internacional Dando Vida al Lenguaje, una enseñanza atractiva, organizado por el Departamento de Enseñanza de Lenguas como antesala al 14º Congreso Internacional para Docentes de Inglés. Nos complace profundamente inaugurar este espacio académico concebido como un punto de convergencia para el diálogo profesional y la actualización pedagógica y la proyección internacional de las buenas prácticas en la enseñanza del inglés como segundo idioma. Esta jornada que congrega a especialistas de reconocida trayectoria, a educadores comprometidos con la excelencia y a redes académicas que trascienden fronteras, nos proponemos repensar el rol de la enseñanza de las lenguas en el mundo contemporáneo. La universidad que hoy les recibe se reconoce como una institución comprometida con la transformación educativa de Honduras y la región. En este sentido, promover eventos como este responde a nuestra misión institucional de fortalecer el desarrollo profesional docente, impulsar la innovación pedagógica e integrar los saberes globales del quehacer educativo. El foro que hoy nos convoca parte de una premisa fundamental. El lenguaje no es únicamente un medio de comunicación, sino un vehículo de pensamiento, cultura, identidad y ciudadanía global. Enseñar una lengua, por tanto, implica abrir horizontes, construir puentes entre realidades diversas y preparar a nuestros estudiantes para comprender y actuar en un mundo interconectado. Durante estos 2 días de trabajo, reflexionaremos en torno a metodologías activas, estrategias comunicativas, el uso significativo de la tecnología y la integración de estrategias comunicativas, el uso, integración de materiales auténticos y el enfoque intercultural en el aula. Todo ello con el objetivo claro de enriquecer nuestras prácticas docentes y potenciar los aprendizajes de quienes confían en nuestra labor como educadores. Agradecemos con especial énfasis la participación de los conferencistas nacionales e internacionales que generosamente compartirán sus conocimientos, así como el esfuerzo del equipo técnico, los moderadores, los maestros de ceremonia y colaboradores que han hecho posible la realización de este evento con altos estándares académicos y organizativos. A nombre de la rectora, del equipo organizador y de toda la comunidad universitaria, les deseo un evento inspirador, enriquecedor y lleno de aprendizajes que se traduzcan en nuevas formas de llevar el lenguaje a la vida y la vida al aula. Que los saberes compartidos aquí contribuyan a renovar nuestra convicción como docentes y que nos impulsen a seguir dando vida al lenguaje y con ello también a la educación. Sean todas y todos bienvenidos a este espacio de encuentro, colaboración e inspiración pedagógica. Muchas gracias. Feliz día a todas y a todos.
Muchas gracias. profesor Bartolomé Chinchilla, vicerrector de Vida Estudiantil, por estas palabras que también muestran su apoyo a esta iniciativa que contribuyó a nuestra profesionalización docente. Muchas gracias. Next, we are pleased to welcome Ms. Maria Luz Gomez, Head of the Department of Languages, who will also share a word with us today. And I understand we have a video from her. So maybe we can play it now.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from today. On behalf of the Department of Teaching Languages at Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to Bringing Language to Life, an online forum for engaging teaching. This event, taking place over the next 2 days, July 17th and 18th, marks not only a celebration of our shared passion for language education, but also a meaningful opportunity to connect, reflect, and grow together as professionals. It also serves as a prelude for our upcoming 14th International Conference for Teachers of English, where many of the themes we explore here will be expanded upon in greater depth. Today, we bring together ESL educators from different corners of the globe, united by a common goal: to make language learning more dynamic, more relevant, and more engaging for our students. And what a better way to do that than by listening to and learning from international experts, exploring hands-on workshops, and engaging in thoughtful conversations with colleagues who share your commitment to excellence in teaching. Our theme, Bringing Language to Life, was not chosen lightly. In classrooms around the world, language is not just a subject. It is a bridge, a connection, a living, breathing tool for understanding and navigating the world. Our job as educators is not only to teach grammar and vocabulary, but to make language real, to make it meaningful, to bring it to life. Through this, we aim to achieve several goals: to strengthen the continuous professional development of teachers, particularly those working in the Honduran and our region. We believe empowering teachers through training, mentorship, and innovation leads to empower students. We want to promote innovation in language teaching. That means encouraging the use of modern, research-based approaches that integrate technology, authentic materials, and communicative strategies to better prepare our learners for real-world language. We seek to foster international collaboration, to build bridges to educators across countries, cultures, and contexts. It is, after all, a deeply endeavor. Collaborate, we grow. And finally, we see as an opportunity to introduce key themes and strategies that will be explored for international conference next year. Over the course of this forum, we'll hear from renowned speakers who will challenge, inspire you with ideas to take back to your classrooms. You will have the chance to participate in interactive, connect fellow educators explore innovative methodologies that put students at the center of learning. I express heartfelt gratitude to our guest speakers who will generously share their and expertise. Contributions are valuable. We are honored by your presence. I also want to thank our organizing team, all the staff at NFM who have tirelessly behind the scenes to make this online event possible. To all of you, our participants, thank you for being here. Willingness to grow, learn, and to collaborate is what makes this event meaningful. As we begin this journey together, I encourage you to be open, curious, and engaged. Ask questions, share your insights, challenge ideas, connect with one another. This is more than a professional development event. It is a chance to be a part of something larger, a global community of educators committed to bringing language to life in every classroom, in every context, for every learner. Once again, welcome. Let the forum begin, and let's continue to inspire, innovate, and ignite a passion for language learning that lasts a lifetime. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gomez, for your encouraging message and for championship these events as well. We apologize to our attendees for the difficulties we had while playing the video. So before we start our first session, I would just like to provide some recommendations for our attendees. Please make sure your microphones are muted during the session so we avoid interruptions. Keep your cameras on for attendance and pictures. I will be glad to see your smiley faces throughout all the sessions. Then make sure your questions are submitted via chat box. And at the end of each session, we'll make sure to provide some remarks and also some main takeaways. As for the certificates, would like to remind you that in order for you to get the certificate for your participation in this English forum, you must meet the following requirements. Number one, attend all sessions both today and tomorrow. Number two, participate actively during each session, including using the chat and responding to prompts from the specialists. And number three, keep your camera on throughout the event to verify active engagement and attendance. We appreciate your commitment to professional development and look forward to your contributions during the forum. I would also like to quickly run through the schedule so I make sure we are all on the same page. So for today, we have 3 sessions. We'll start right afterwards this opening ceremony with the first session, Cultural Connections Through Language Teaching. That will go from 8:30 through 9:30. Afterwards, we'll have Real World Materials in Action from 9:35 through 10:35, and we'll finish up with the role of social media in English learning from 10:45 through 11:45, right? So we're running good time. Once again, welcome to all of our participants. We hope today's forum sparks new conversations, connections, and ideas that will extend well beyond the screen. So now let's proceed to our first session. I would like to welcome Mrs. Lynette Escalante, who will be our moderator for the first session, Cultural Connections Through Language Teaching.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diaz. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's first session titled Cultural Connections Through Language Teaching, Strategies for Integrating Cultural Elements into Lesson. In this session, we will explore practical ways to incorporate cultural elements into language instruction, along with case studies on successful cross-cultural teaching experiences. I am especially pleased to introduce today's speaker, who once began his journey as a student at our university and later contributed as a professor. Dr. Jaime Mejia Mayorga is an educator, researcher, and multilingual consultant with extensive experience in global education, multilingualism, and community engagement. As an indigenous Chorotega and Honduran national, he brings a unique and powerful perspective to his work, one rooted in diversity, equity, and relationality. His work bridges formal education, indigenous knowledge systems, and social justice. With a PhD in applied linguistics and a Fulbright-funded academic background, Dr. Mejia Mayorga has built an international career focused on developing inclusive, culturally responsive, and research-informed educational practices. His areas of expertise include multilingual and international education, curriculum development, teacher training, educational policy, and instructional design. He has collaborated with communities, universities, NGOs, and international organizations to promote quality education for linguistically and culturally diverse learners. Throughout his career, Dr. Mejia Mayorga has led initiatives that promote global citizenship, intercultural competence, and social justice, designing and implementing educational programs that reflect indigenous and marginalized perspectives. His contributions to curriculum alignment, multiliteracies, and community-driven education support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around equitable access and knowledge exchange. He has served in multiple leadership roles, including as director, consultant, and university faculty member with a strong record in educational program development, creating multilingual and global learning frameworks, faculty and teacher training, supporting culturally responsive research-based instruction, research and policy advocacy, advancing equity in language education, indigenous and community education, co-developing learning spaces that respect traditional knowledge. At the core of Dr. Mejia Mayorga's work is a deep commitment to transformational learning, education that fosters connection, healing, and empowerment across cultures. He envisions a world where education is not only inclusive, but also a driving force for systemic and societal change. So I am very pleased to invite Dr. Jaime Mayorga to begin his presentation.
Thank you so much. Good morning, buenos días. Koy Murio in Chorotega. I am really pleased to be with you, Teacher Lynette. Thank you so much for the introduction. It sounds very powerful, but I'm a regular person, you know, and just like many of you, I think I have taken advantage of the opportunities that life has given me, and that's what life is about, right? Siempre tenemos que dar nuestro mejor esfuerzo and just seize those opportunities. Thank you, Teacher Diego, and obviously I'm extremely grateful for the invitation that UPN-FM, especially the Department of Language Teaching, extended to me so that I can present and share with you. You never say no to one's home, right? And what I have accomplished in my life, greatly I owe it to UPN-FM and to my professors and mentors and colleagues and friends from UPN-FM, as well as my colleagues and friends from this profession so beautiful that we work in, which is English language teaching. And so I'm grateful and I'm excited to be here with you. And I'm just gonna start because I have 1 hour, and as you can see, I talk a lot and I love talking. So let me see if I can share my screen. I cannot, but I'm gonna send a request. And now I can present. And I'm assuming that you're able to see my screen. If so, please type yes in the chat. Okay, or thumbs up. Yeah, all right, thank you so much. And I see that many of you are joining from like all these places throughout Honduras. I see like friends and colleagues as well connected. So good. Les mando un saludo muy fraterno. All right, so let's begin. Okay, even Mexico. All right. Hey, we go international nowadays, huh? That's the way to do it. In Colombia as well. Right on. Okay. Well, I'm gonna start. Thank you so much for the text and the thumbs up. as teacher Lynette shared, I'm going to be sharing about how to center and privilege culture in our classrooms, and specifically the title that or the assignment that I was given is to talk about how to make cultural connections in our classrooms. I know Lynette used a different title, but the way I titled this presentation was Cultural Connections in the English Language Classroom. And yeah, let's begin. That's a little bit of information about me. So I'm a language and literacy educator, an applied linguist, and also a researcher. And what I do has to do with educational justice and equity, multilingual and multicultural education, and working with and for indigenous peoples and global communities. And for today's presentation, my intention is that we accomplish the following goals, which is defining culturally sustaining practices and pedagogies for ELT classrooms, then identifying ways of teaching to promote culturally sustaining pedagogies in our classrooms, and then imagining, right, already thinking how that's going to look like in our own classrooms. And just before I start, I just want to say that I'm not here to tell you what to do or how to do it. I'm just going to give you suggestions. You know what works best for you. And I always like to tell my friends and colleagues who are teachers too and educators, what we possess is a teaching toolkit, right? A teaching toolbox. So we end up like putting things, whatever we learn, in that toolkit toolbox, and depending in our context and on our context, we're going to choose what works best. So take it lightly as a grain of salt or rice. But as I said, I'm not here to tell you what to do. So I don't bring a solution. I bring ideas, okay? And before I share those ideas, I want to position myself, share a little bit about you, because just as many of you, yo soy catracho, right? Bien hondureñito. I was born in the Seguro Social in Comayagüela, raised in El Corpus, Choluteca. I think I was 3 months old when my mom took me there. So I'm from a pueblo del sur, and I'm completely a product of the public education system of Honduras. Kindergarten, school, primary school, high school, in Tegucigalpa actually. I did 1 year at Instituto Blanca Adriana Ponce, which is a public school. Si no llegaba temprano, me tocaba sentarme en un bloque, right? And the following year, I went to Instituto España Jesús Mía Selva in La Kennedy. That's where I walked, I studied, then I went to UPN in Tegucigalpa, and hustling, right? While I was a student. Then I worked in La Ceiba, then I came to the US to get a master's, and then I stayed for a PhD. While I was doing the PhD, I worked in Santa Rosa de Copan and also in Gracias Lempira. And currently I am in the United States, and my work, I know it sounded very important, but what I like to do and what I am focused on doing is sharing my history, as well as the histories of my people, the place I come from, and also the place I have been allowed and invited to live, okay? And at the end of the day, that's what we are. We are storytellers. And that picture that you see in there, it's a picture of El Corpus. And that hill that you see is called Calaire, okay? But I wanted to share that because that's what I grew up seeing every single day of my life. All right, so that's a little bit about me. I'm just one of you guys, and I'm ready to start. Are you guys ready? Yes? Let's do this. Okay, so cultural connections for us as teachers of English. And the thing about culture is that the way we define it can be a little bit problematic, right? Because culture can be interpreted in so many ways. Culture, and I took this definition from the work by Cramsche, who is a language researcher and professional too, educator, she says that culture is having membership, is that membership in a discourse community that shares a common social space and history, and also common imagining. So we envision and imagine the same things, and we also share verbal communicative practices and habits of thought, the way we think. We embody and embrace a community identity and also moral values, and we understand collectively our history as well as what we want to accomplish for the future. So those aspirations. So culture is that belonging to a community, belonging to a group that shares multiple things like spaces, histories, visions, ideas, values, practices. And I really like that idea of the way we communicate. And I really like that idea about like aspirations for the future. And I thought, like, if we're going to be talking about cultural connections in this presentation, I might as well say, okay, what is it that I understand by culture? And I understand that it is that membership, right? That fact of belonging to a community or to a group. But as I said, culture is one of those concepts or ideas that can be defined in multiple ways. And when you think about it closely, we cannot even say like culture is only one. We actually talk about cultures, right? And so I was wondering, so what culture or cultures do we center and privilege in our classrooms? And at the very like top of my head, I think, well, like we're teachers of English, right? So we're gonna center and privilege the cultures of those places and those communities that use English, because that's what we teach. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That's actually, a good answer. But we shouldn't limit ourselves to do that. We need to understand that there are multiple cultures within a culture, okay? So when we talk about culture, we might talk about national culture. We might talk about, like, in our case of Honduras, a departmental culture, maybe the culture of Choluteca, right? The culture of Valle, the culture of Francisco Morazan, the culture of Atlantida, the culture of the Bay Islands. Maybe it is a city or local culture. I am from El Corpus, right? So I might have a specific set of cultural practices that are only understood and shared by people who grew up in El Corpus, right? The same if you're from Tegucigalpa, like there's a local culture from there. The same if you are from Santa Rosa de Copan or from La Ceiba, right? Or from Trujillo. There's always this idea of, there's also this idea of city or local culture. Also, institutional culture. If you went to UPNFM, you know that there are some things that we do that only people who are familiar with UPNFM are going to understand. Like saying "Vamos Lobos," right? That we know that it's only us who understand that. And we can think as well of a culture just for teenagers, right? A culture just for adults, a culture just for elderly people. We can also talk about a global culture. We can also talk about a regional culture, like the cultural culture of Central Americans. We can also talk about social media culture, right? How we do things on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram. For example, that on Instagram, if you're gonna upload pictures, they gotta be nice pictures, because Instagram is like that kind of, I wanna live that famous lifestyle in a way. So that's also a culture. And there are so many cultures also that are hidden, that are implicit, that are neglected because of the way we have developed as societies or communities. For example, right, the picture that I show you of that hill that is called Calaire, that's an implicit culture for us in El Corpus and in Choluteca in general, because Calaire is a word that comes from the indigenous language Chorotega, and we don't know that, right? We just grow up naming that hill Chorotega, Calaire. But what we don't know is that Calaire belongs to that language, to the Chorotega language. So that is an implicit culture that we don't know we have access to, even though we do have access to it. Okay, so cultures within a culture. Just for you to consider that as we talk about cultural connections in our classroom. Now, it sounds like a little bit challenging, right? Because there are so many cultures in the classroom, available. And how am I gonna bring all of those cultures in my to my classroom? Like, it sounds too much, and I already have to do lesson planning, and I already have to like make sure that they understand verb to be, and also, plural nouns, and that they learn how to make yes, no questions, etc., etc. So we have so many things to do, right? And that's why I say, like, I'm not here to tell you what to do exactly. I'm just giving you ideas. And as you consider these ideas and this information, I would like to present this framework that is called post-method pedagogy, who was introduced by Kumarabadivelu. That's a hard last name. And I think he is from Bangladesh, if I'm not wrong. But he talks that the way we need to talk about classroom teaching in our profession shouldn't be based on methods. It shouldn't be only about like grammar translation method, and then communicative language teaching, and then like direct method. Like, all of those methods that we learn in the program, they're important, right? And they are useful. But we know that teaching it doesn't follow a method. We end up doing so many things, and some of them we don't even learn, when we go to UPN and get this degree. So he talks about approaching teaching guided by these principles, three principles: particularity, possibility, and practicality. Okay? So he says the way you teach English should be guided by those three principles: particularity, possibility, and practicality. But what exactly did he mean by that? Well, when it comes to particularity, it means what is particular or unique about our context. When it comes to practicality, it means what is practical, doable, realistically achievable in our context. And when he says possibility, he talks about what could be possible and innovative in our context. So as we talk about cultural connections, what cultures to center and privilege in our classrooms, let's consider that, right? So what's particular or unique about my context? What's practical about my context? What's possible? What can be innovative about my context? And when I think about, like, our beautiful land, when I think about Honduras, like, a few ideas come to my mind. I'm gonna start with Choluteca, and I'm gonna start with El Corpus, right? So we have this tradition of being a mining town. Somos un pueblo minero. And by the way, there's a lot going on in El Corpus because of permits not being respected, the mining company like almost chopping the Catholic Church, which is at the very center of the pueblo. So many things happening there. But anyway, so we have this mining tradition, right? Maybe the way we create a class of English, right? And obviously, this is going to include the curriculum, the kind of activities that we create, etc., etc. Maybe it has to be something connected to that of mining. Do we learn how to like talk about, minerals? Do we talk about like these processes? Do we have the opportunity to talk about mining in the artisanal sense and the more industrial sense? And for example, when you talk about the artisanal sense, you end up using a botella, right? Do you know what a botella is? Like one of those like discs, right? That you use to move it around and get the gold, right? From the soil. So maybe we can create classes like that, And sometimes, and probably you know this by now, and I'm sure that some of the other presenters are going to talk about that as well. But it is important to teach language and grammar and vocabulary and so on. But nowadays, and research has shown this, when we assign projects and when we assign tasks, the chances of students actually learning language are higher. Okay, so a project of how to make a brochure or a presentation on mining procedures, because students, they have to find the vocabulary, they have to find the phrases. Obviously with your support, then that actually increases the probability of them retaining that language, those phrases. So that is the case of Choluteca, right? Mining, Valle, and I'm thinking on San Lorenzo. So San Lorenzo is a place that, you know, has a lot of tourism, especially because of the mangroves and the bay there. There's also commerce because of the port. So how can we create those how can we bring those local cultures of tourism and also of like mangrove sustainable procedures, as well as even shrimp farming? Okay, how can we create classes to talk about those things that are local, that students, once they leave the classroom, is what they end up experiencing? La Paz, I can think of coffee, right? In Intibucá, I can think of, for example, lots of traditions when it comes to, you know, the Lenca tradition there and the Lenca community there. The same with Copan, the same with Lempira and Gracias, also coffee. Well, when I think about like Atlantida, obviously with Tela and La Ceiba, we're talking about like tourism, we're talking about like how to go rafting, how to talk about going on a hike, hacer senderismo en inglés, okay? Those are the kind of cultures or cultural practices that we want to like also promote, right? In La Ceiba, we have, and also throughout Atlantida, a strong presence of the Garifuna community. Do we create lessons about that? Also of the Miskito people, do we learn about how they interpret life? Do we learn about their cultural practices? Because again, right, when we talk about culture, there are so many ways that we can approach it. So thinking about that, once again, what's practical, what's particular, unique, and what's possible based on my context. And think about that. Think about those cultures that, you know, are accessible to your students and to you as the teacher. How can you merge that? Okay. I think about Olancho. Olancho does a lot of agriculture. Do we create classes that center that, you know, what it means to be, you know, a farmer, what it means to be a cattle raiser, what it means to take care of like cows and horses, etc., etc. So those are cultural connections as well. Okay. And that's what I meant by that. What's particular, what's practical, and what's possible. Always think about your context. Think about what's more meaningful to your students. All right. And as I said, sometimes because of our profession as teachers of English, we think that it is better to just center and privilege the United States, or, you know, or Canada or Australia. Nowadays, I think we might be able to say like Jamaica too, because they speak English, Nigeria too, because they speak English. But we don't have to go that far away. We literally can use what we are familiar with to make these cultural connections. I'm admitting people too to the session, by the way. And give me a break. Greetings from San Lorenzo. Exactly. Katie says, how to experience the carnival. Yes, because those are the local cultures, and that's the way we make cultural connections, right? I completely agree. Thank you so much. All right, let's continue. So how can we engage students if we were to center and privilege our own culture and cultural practices? How can we do this, right? If we were to do it like just based on our own cultures, right? What's familiar with us. So I'm gonna introduce this framework. I don't want to call it framework because I don't think it is, but this group of pedagogies that they are called culturally sustaining pedagogies, okay? CSP for short. And what they do is that they build on students' funds of knowledge and identities for academic success, and in our case, because we're teachers of English, for language development too. Meaning that when we build on students' funds of knowledge, they might be able to learn English with more success, okay? And what do I mean by funds of knowledge? You're probably talking, right? So funds of knowledge are those cultural practices and literacies that students have and that they developed at home and in their communities, okay? Esas prácticas culturales y alfabetismos o literacias. What do I mean by that? If you know how to milk a cow, that's a literacy that you possess because you know how to do it and other people cannot, okay? If you know how to plant maize, corn, that's a literacy as well. So I don't know how to do it, but some of you might, okay? Or some of our students might. Because you know how to do it, that's considered a literacy. That's actually considered un alfabetismo, ¿verdad? If you know how to play football, soccer, right? Or how to use TikTok, because it is a specific set of knowledge and skills that you know so that you successfully can do that or use that, that's considered a literacy or a cultural practice, right? So when we are committed to advancing culturally sustaining pedagogies in our classrooms, we build on students' funds of knowledge. And here is an APA reference for you to take a look at in case you want later on, so that you can learn more about funds of knowledge, okay? And culturally sustaining pedagogies has 3 movements, okay? Or yeah, I'm gonna call them movements. Culturally relevant teaching, culturally responsive teaching, and culturally sustaining teaching. They look a little bit alike, especially because the 3 have culturally and teaching, right? But they are like a little bit different. And the way they work is that each one of them builds on the other, right? So culturally sustaining teaching builds on culturally responsive teaching, and culturally responsive teaching builds on culturally relevant teaching. But teacher Jaime, what the heck is that? What do you mean by all these culturally teachings, right? Okay, so here's a little bit of an explanation. The culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally relevant teaching is when you just bring to the classroom content that is relevant to students' lived experiences. So they just get to see it, okay? And when they see it, when they read it, when they listen to it, when you talk about it, they're like, ah, I know that. Ah, yes, that's the way we do it back home. Or, ah, yes, I remember my mom doing it the same way, or my uncle doing it the same way, etc., etc. That's culturally relevant pedagogy. When the student knows, okay, is familiar with the content that you are presenting. Culturally responsive pedagogy, okay, that's a little bit like more complex. And that's when you take on those funds of knowledge and also that cultural knowledge, those prior experiences, and those performance styles based on those students' cultural backgrounds, okay? So if you know that a student is familiar with fishing, you're gonna create a class that is connected to fishing, not only in content, but that requires that students do something as if they were fishing, right? If you know that students live closer to a lake, right, like in Yohoa Lake, then you're gonna create a lesson that is not only culturally relevant because it's going to be to talk about the lake, but that is responsive as well because you might end up taking students to the lake and getting a sample of the water so that you can analyze it. Or, you talk about the flora and the fauna that lives around surrounding the Yohoa Lake. When you create a lesson that not only exposes students to what they're familiar with it, but that also uses and kind of requests that students use what they know for, like, succeeding in your class, then that's culturally responsive pedagogy. So it's not only seeing, right? It's not only the exposure, but actually the doing in the classroom. And then we have the culturally sustaining pedagogy, all right? And this is a little bit more complex, building on the relevant pedagogy and the responsive pedagogy. The culturally sustaining pedagogy is not just including that culture or cultural practices that students possess, but actually allowing them to understand that it is important for, academic success, but also for other aspects of life, right? And let me explain a little bit more this. So you have a student, I'm thinking on my experience in La Ceiba, right? Especially because I just received a text from teacher Brenna. Saludos. But in La Ceiba, like, it's a multicultural, setting. So we have the mestizo or mixed race students, quote unquote. And then you have Garifuna students, then you have Miskito students, you have Islander students, you have students who speak like 3 languages at least. Then you might have like a Page student as well, or a Tawaka student. And one thing is to talk about that in the classroom, but another one is to actually allow the student to use what they already are familiar with, the way they do things in their communities, in their classroom. And another thing is allowing them to understand, like, the way you do things, your funds of knowledge, those cultural practices that you possess, they're good for you in your community, they're good for you here in the classroom, but they're also good for you in whatever, endeavor that you end up doing. So it's understanding that our cultural practices are not only like useful for our communities, but also for the way we experience life in general. I'm gonna continue building on this example, right? So for my doctoral work, I ended up collaborating with 2 of my former students in La Ceiba, who are now my colleagues, and we ended up creating this methodology, and I know all of you are familiar with research, right? That is called Turi Aisaya. And that is the way, the Miskito people, the way they taught me, have a critical dialogue, right? When they have like an honest conversation, that they sit down and, they share so many aspects of their lives and they share stories, but they also share insights and critiques and suggestions. So, that in research, we have quantitative and qualitative, right? And then we have, like, in qualitative, interviews and focus groups. Well, we were not doing that. We were doing Turi Aisaya. That is culturally sustaining, Why? Because I'm allowing for all of us to see that Turi Aisaya, that cultural practice, is not only relevant in their communities, and is not only relevant when they're like learning a language, but it's also relevant when we're doing research. And maybe they take on that approach to do other things. I for sure am. That's the way I always approach conversations nowadays, as if I'm participating into the Isaiah, meaning that I'm having an honest dialogue that, is fully transparent, and it includes laughter. It's just like human interaction, right? But that is also going to include those insights, those critiques, because it is serious. And so to be able to do that outside of the classroom, that is culturally sustaining, okay? So you have those 3 principles, the way you can approach culture in your classroom. I shouldn't say principles, frameworks, right? Culturally relevant pedagogy, when you expose students to what they're familiar with. Culturally responsive pedagogy, when you actually include activities in the classroom that have students use what they're familiar with, those funds of knowledge they possess. And culturally sustaining pedagogy is when you not only expose students to those, cultural practices and funds of knowledge they already know what's relevant to them, And when you not only create those classroom activities that have students use what they know, right, in the classroom, but also when you allow students to see that their cultural practices and their funds of knowledge, they're not good only in their communities, and they might not be good only for like learning, but also for doing other things in life. So those are culturally sustaining pedagogies. How can you apply all these pedagogies in your classrooms? You're the ones who know, because you are the ones who are the experts in your context. And again, thinking about what's practical, what's possible, and what's particular, okay? So here are some references in case you want to explore this further. These are like seminal works, as they say, right? Esos son como las obras canon de estos temas. So Ladson Billings for culturally relevant pedagogy, Gave for culturally responsive pedagogy, and then Paris and Alim for culturally sustaining pedagogy. Okay, feel free to check it out if you want. And the question, the most pressing and important question, how does this look in the classroom? Es la pregunta de oro, right? Okay, so let's see. And obviously this can look in so many ways, right? In so many ways. But for example, when you allow students to use all of their languages for language learning, that's a culturally sustaining practice, okay? So what you do as teachers is that you allow and encourage students to draw on their full linguistic repertoire, okay? So that includes Spanish, obviously, because that's the language that we mainly speak, majoritively speak, I should say. Indigenous languages, if they speak an indigenous language like Maya HRT, or Pech. And obviously English, right? Because that's the language that we're learning. But we use all of those languages to make meaning out of things, to communicate, and also to engage critically with text and with tasks, okay? So most of the time we think that because it is an English class, English only, and research has shown that when we use our first language or mother language, we succeed academically speaking, okay? So an example, we allow our students to use Spanish for learning English, right? So there is this example, there is this project that you assigned. Going back to San Lorenzo, right? And learning about the shrimp farming, las granjas de camarón. So they have to prepare a presentation on shrimp farming, and they do their work. What is the caveat? That they have to present both in English and in Spanish, and you can play with that. They can use languages both languages at the same time, or one presentation in English and another one in Spanish, etc., etc. But that's the whole point, right? Creating classroom activities that allow all of the languages that we speak to be used. And this is in alignment with bilingualism, with multilingualism, and also with translanguaging, which is a pedagogical practice that says that we should use all of the languages, regardless of the way we are told to use them, okay? Because the way our brain works is that we rely, okay, on all these codes that we have. So the moment it goes out, we understand, right? That we might be using different languages, but in our brain, we only have ideas, right? And so we might have these ideas in all languages at the same time, in English and Spanish, or just half of it in Spanish and the other half in English, or just a few words in English and the rest in Spanish, etc., etc. That's what translanguaging is about. But anyway, you create this culturally sustaining practice in the classroom by allowing students to use all of their languages for language learning. I see something in the chat. I'm going to read it. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Paul. Yes, definitely. All right. Let's go with the other one. Bring the known, the familiar to the classroom, okay? So teachers incorporate students' cultural knowledge, histories, and ways of knowing into the curriculum, okay? So maybe the way this looks is that students learn from community elders stories about their communities as well as the history of their communities. And this can be done in Spanish, okay? But then they have to prepare presentations or websites in English to share what they learned. And this is in alignment with place-based pedagogies, with culturally sustaining pedagogies as well, and also with indigenous pedagogies. So, I'm gonna go to El Corpus. I'm gonna take you to El Corpus again. In El Corpus, there is this story about this golden lizard, el lagarto de oro. Tal vez la han escuchado anteriormente. But the story says, and I'm gonna use Spanish for this, que abajo de la iglesia del Corpus, de la iglesia católica que está en el Parque Central, hay una entrada de una mina, and that is true. Like the entrance of the mina is still there. So at the very end of that entrance, there is a golden lizard. Ahí había un lagarto de oro. Y cuando los españoles llegaron al pueblo y se dieron cuenta, trataron de ir a sacar el lagarto de oro y ¡pum! La mina empezó a botar piedras, unos se murieron, otros salieron corriendo. Y fue cuando vieron el lagarto de oro. So that's a local story, right? And that also talks about the history of a corpus. So maybe we bring an elder, un abuelo, una abuela, un anciano, right? O un líder en la comunidad. That person talks to us and shares this story. And then the assignment is, okay, create a presentation or dramatize, you know, or like make a role play of this story. But you gotta do it in English, okay? So again, right, like they're using something that is known, that is familiar, that is local to use language. And that's going to become meaningful because they already know what that story is about. So that is also how we make these cultural connections in the classroom, okay? And the last one, I know I'm finishing a little bit earlier. Well, I'm still missing a couple of slides, so don't worry. The last example that I decided to bring and share with you is have students create, produce digital text, okay? What do I mean by digital text? They can be blogs, they can be digital stories, they can be advocacy videos, they can be TikTok videos, YouTube videos, Facebook posts, you name it, okay? As long as it is digital. So teachers engage students in creating blogs, digital stories, or advocacy videos in English that address local and global issues, combining language learning with civic engagement. So students are assigned projects where they design proposals for community engagement and community well-being. This is one example, right? So they come with the proposal, you know, they propose like a specific project, and then they create either a website or a series of YouTube or TikTok videos, or they dramatize, you know, like they going to the mayor, sorry, and saying like, alcalde, we have a proposal for the community. Okay, we want to share it with you. And, you know, they do it. And this is the way we have students create those digital texts. This is in alignment with local teaching practices, bridging the global with the local, and also with digital literacies, right? Because you create websites, videos, etc. I'm gonna give you an example because this I've done it too. So in 2022, I think it was, yes, you know, still during the pandemic years, when we were like doing most of the things online. I was teaching for Santa Rosa de Copan, actually. Teacher Diego was my supervisor in that time. And I was teaching level 4, I think. And I just gave them this prompt, okay? This was the assignment. I want you to come up with a proposal that identifies a problem or an issue in your local community and proposes a solution to that issue or challenge or problem. And in addition to that proposal, to create either a video or a website where you share your proposal, but please be specific, write an introduction. I want you to, like, if you need to present a budget because you need money, present it, include it as well, etc., etc. Oh my gosh. The projects that I got from students were amazing. Some of them, well, one of them I remember, this group, they said, in our community we don't have parks, and there's one park but it has like a basketball court, and so the teenagers are always there. So we want to suggest or propose that, you know, we need a park, and that park is going to be for kids and for elderly people. And they said, and we're gonna need like 1 million lempiras for that, and 200,000 lempiras is going to be for that, and the other amount of money is gonna be for that. And they created this website. I was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. It was fun, right? And so again, like bringing the local and being like digitally savvy, creating digital text, but also providing these solutions that might serve as example to people in other places around the world, right? I remember like another one went to, so she lived, I remember this person lived closer to a river, also in the west region of Honduras, so closer to Santa Rosa and Gracias. But she lived closer to this river, and she created like a documentary, creó como un documental. She explained she talked about the river first, and then she like you know, showed us the river, like in the mountains, beautiful. And then she said like one of the issues is that, you know, the river is getting all these like garbage. Maybe people don't have where to put the garbage. We don't know why this garbage ends up in here, so we need to clean it. And so she showed like a couple of pictures of, you know, the places that were dirty. And then they're like, so how can we clean it? And then she was like, we can use these sticks, or we can create like group, we can coordinate groups of people to come and pick up the trash. And you know, she was in the video picking up the trash and like creating all these things. And it was like, as I said, a documentary. I was like, yes, I was really impressed. And I remember the other one. This person said that she had identified, based on the pandemic, that the community was more like quiet than usual. They were not talking to each other as usual. And she ended up creating like she created like this stand. And the stand had like painted stones. Ella pintó unas piedras y les puso caritas felices. She also created like a couple of cards with positive messages. And she explained, right? Like, I am creating this stand to support the well-being of my community. And you know, I know this is a simple way, but it's simple, but it is a way to let people know they are appreciated and that they deserve to be happy. And she showed pictures, okay, in that website of the creations she made to support the well-being of her community members. Those are the things that we want to do to be culturally sustaining pedagogists, okay? Making those cultural connections to what's familiar with us, to our like local communities. And as I said, maybe these examples can be useful to people in other communities. That's how we connect the local with the global. Or sometimes we take a global issue like, you know, contamination, and like the person who, like the student who went to the river, and we share about that. Okay, so there's too much garbage. We don't know what to do with garbage, but one thing is that it cannot be in the river because the river carries water and the water goes to all these other communities. So let's clean it. So again, taking a global issue and tackling it locally. That's how we also make cultural connections, right? And I'm hoping that you are feeling inspired to actually like go to your classrooms and start like having conversations. First, maybe it's a conversation. Later on, maybe it can be a lesson, right? Later on, maybe it can be a curriculum that is actually like culturally sustaining and that makes all these cultural connections. Because again, as I said, we do things in the English language classroom most of the time that it sends us to all these other places, distant places, right? And I'm not saying that's wrong. It is good because at the end of the day, English is a global language, right? It connects us with all. But we also need to learn how to talk about the things that we're familiar with and that we grew up with. Because when we meet these people from all these other places, what are we going to talk about, right? So we need to learn how to talk about what's familiar with us so that when that moment comes, when we meet people from all over the world, we get the chance to share, what's ours and make those cultural connections. So, some of the takeaways: consider what's particular, meaning unique, what's practical, meaning doable, and possible, meaning innovative in your context. Remember that culture is not monolithic. It is not one color, right? We all possess multiple cultures. That's why cultures within a culture. You are invited to center, privilege, and celebrate all of them as much as you can and you want in your classroom. Remember to use students' funds of knowledge, those cultural practices and literacies that they possess, so that you can be a culturally sustaining teacher, meaning that you're going to be using culturally sustaining pedagogies. And be creative and innovative when establishing those cultural connections. Consider what's familiar and local and connect and share with the global and international. That has been my presentation. If you have questions, please let me know. We might have like 5 minutes for questions. And if you would like, please follow me on social media. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, and I'm on Instagram. And I'm sharing all these things that I have learned. So if you want to like stay in touch, you're more than welcome to. I actually invite you to do it. Okay. So yeah, let's go for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayorga, for sharing these unique, doable, and innovative ideas that remind us of the importance of validating our students' identities, build meaningful connections in our classrooms, and create truly inclusive learning environments. If there are any questions that you have for our presenter, this is the time that you can use to do it.
And I'm reading some of the comments. Thank you for the comments. I see that many of you are like doing these things already, like Teacher Brenny saying, like the virtual exchanges, part of COIL. Yes, I agree with Dalila too. She's saying that we need to make them feel proud of their own culture. And it is true, right? Like in this globalized world, we need to know what we're about so that we can share with the others. Paul.
Hi, Jaime. Thanks for everything. Yeah, I'd just like to mention that I'm actually doing what you're doing without thinking about it. I teach at Zamorano, the Agricultural University in Francisco Morazan, and I have international students. I don't just have Honduran students. So I've got students from all over Latin America and part of the Caribbean. And I give a course called the Global Seminar. And what we do is we look at world issues like overfishing, like pollution, like climate change, etc. And what we do is, or what I do is, I get the students from the different countries to present the issues in their countries, so we can see what's happening, not just in Honduras, but also in Nicaragua, in Chile, in Paraguay, in the Dominican Republic. And even since I have in some classes more Hondurans than any of the other nationalities, then I'll split the Hondurans up into the different regions, the North Coast, the center, the South. Okay, so we can see their individual or different aspects or regional aspects of air pollution, for example, or water pollution. Okay, so we get this. Now, I do not let them speak in Spanish when they're presenting in the plenary, but I do allow them to speak Spanish in their subgroups while they're researching. I just can't stop it. Right.
Yeah.
So I let them do that because then the ideas flow much more fluently and bilingual. Most of my students are high intermediate or even bilingual, but they still prefer to discuss in their groups in Spanish. But then in the plenary, it's all English, no other languages. And so I'm doing that, okay, but without letting them present in Spanish, right? That's the difference. Thank you very much for everything. Very
My
nice
pleasure.
ideas.
My pleasure. Definitely culturally sustaining instruction there, right? That's a great example. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Sandra says COIL projects are good opportunities to value our culture and learn to appreciate other cultures as well.
Yes, they are. I agree. I agree.
If there are no more questions nor comments, we thank you once again, Dr. Mayorga, for your insightful, reflective, innovative, and inspiring presentation. We hope it has provided valuable ideas and inspiration for all of your language and teaching practices in the different parts of the world where you guys are at. To close this session, I just want to remind you of the next one that we will have at 9:35 a.m., which is with Dr. Dawn Wink, and her session is going to be titled Real World Materials in Action. Please remember that you need to access a different link to join that session. Wishing you all continued success. Have a great day. And in the chat, you have all of Dr. Mayorga's information for social media, so you can follow him.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you
yeah,
so
we'll
much.
be in touch, okay? Have a wonderful day.
See you in our next session.
Thanks.